Welcome to Jeusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jeusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jeusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history and its people. This is a special episode. While the podcast is still taking a break and I'm looking into new interviews and new episodes. But today, my guests, Matthew Teller and Mahmoud Muna, are presenting a new and very important book, Daybreak in Gaza. Stories of Palestinian Lives and Culture. The book will be available shortly and is being published by Saki Books. This was Gaza, a place of humanity and creativity, rich in culture and industry. A place now pulverized and devastated, its entire population displaced by a seemingly endless onslaught. Today, as its heritage is being destroyed, Gaza survivors preserve their culture for literature, music, stories, and memories. Daybreak in Gaza is a record of that heritage, revealing an extraordinary place and people. Vignettes of artists, acrobats, doctors, students, shopkeepers, and teachers across the generations offer stories of love, life, loss, and survival. They display the wealth of Gaza's cultural landscape and the breadth of its history. This remarkable book humanises the people dismissed as mere statistics and portrays lives full of joy and meaning. Daybreak in Gaza stands as a mark of resistance to the destruction and as a testament to the people of Gaza. Both Mahmoud and Matthew have been previous guests of the podcast, and you can find the episodes available online. Mahmoud Muna is a writer, publisher, and bookseller from Jerusalem. He runs Jerusalem's celebrated educational bookshop and the bookshop at the American Colony Hotel, both centers of the city's literary scene. Mahmoud is also active in the cultural initiatives across Palestine and recently published the first Arabic edition of Granta magazine. Matthew Teller is a UK-based writer and broadcaster. He has written on the Middle East for BBC, Guardian, Independent, Times, Financial Times, and he has produced documentaries for BBC Radio 4 and World Service. Matthew is the author of 9 Quarters of Jerusalem, a new biography of the old city. Normally, I start the interviews asking about the authors, but today I rather focus on Gaza and the people of Gaza. Now, maybe while saying something about yourself, can you tell us how did the book come about? Why is it so hard to hear the voices of the people of Gaza or those that are connected to the city and surrounding towns and villages?
It's a really good question, Roberto. Why I'm going to answer the second part first. Why is it so hard to hear the people, the voices of Gaza and the area around? It's so hard because of, I'm speaking from the UK. I'm a UK-based writer. It's so hard because the voices of Palestinians and the experiences of Palestinians and the culture of Palestinians is marginalized and suppressed in the media here and in publishing here as well. So the chances for Palestinians to have their experiences out in the world in the sort of national conversation of the UK is very, very limited indeed, and that was one of the motivations. I mean, it's one of the long-term motivations for me doing what I'm doing at all. But that was one of the motivations for me in trying to get this particular book, Daybreak in Gaza, off the ground. It was, when October the 7th and the aftermath of that became clear, it was shocking and horrifying beyond belief. I saw a friend of mine actually on social media quite recently say, in fact, she was for several weeks shocked into silence, which is what it felt like. I mean, I remember in October and November, I was speaking. I was very lucky to be involved with a PALFest event in London. At the end of October, I was speaking on stage. I was joining the marches that were happening in London and other cities as well. I was writing what I could, but I remember feeling I'm a writer, I'm an author, and I remember feeling that we need to be acting here. This is so shocking and so dreadful, the Israeli assault, that in this industry which I'm involved in, which is publishing and also media, which are kind of related industries, we're supposed to be creative people. This is an industry full of people who create from their imagination, and they make things happen that didn't previously exist. They bring good stuff into the world. What are we doing? This sense of, which I'm sure is very familiar to everybody listening to this as well, sense of impotence. We need to be acting. That we have power. Let's use it. And it felt to me that being on stage, there were events in London also later, November and December, and the marches continued and acts of solidarity continued as well. And all of that is important. It has a place. But I needed to do more. And this is a line which I'm stealing from Mahmoud. Mahmoud will come in shortly. But it's a line which resonates with me as well. He talks about how he needed to be able to say, when his daughters asked him, what did you do when there was a genocide? He needed to have an answer. Exactly the same point was in my head independently in cities far apart, that I was thinking as this was unfolding, when it comes to the time that we look back and either you are asked by somebody else or family, or you say to yourself, you look at yourself in the mirror and you ask, what did you do? You have to have an answer. There's a moral imperative here to act. So all of this was driving me forward anyway. So this was December and January. This is the beginning of the book, to try and refocus the attention of the world on the suffering and the oppression of the people of Gaza and their culture and their history and their built environment and their natural environment. And there were lots of conversations that I had with people in publishing, in media, trying to develop ideas, trying to say, we need to act, and we need to act now. There needs to be something done quickly. Publishing doesn't move quickly. Usually a book is sort of between a year and a half and 2 years from commissioning to being on the shelf. That we don't have that kind of time, and the people of Gaza don't have that kind of time either. So there were sort of multiple imperatives pushing forward to try and develop something that was of worth and value. And over time, over conversations with Mahmoud, as well as different publishers, eventually Saki Publishers, a small independent publisher in London who focus on books, both fiction and non-fiction from the Middle East, sort of came together. And there was an understanding, a recognition from them that I didn't find in any other publisher. Publishers were telling me, this is the wrong time for a book like this. There's no market for a book like this. What we really want, one publisher said, what we really want is an insider account of both sides. And talking about shocking you into silence, that shocked me into silence for a while as well. These are just unspeakable, unthinkable responses to be facing from the corporate world of publishing in London to the events that were going on in Gaza and the way that the people of Gaza were suffering. Saki came forward, Saki understood, and Saki commissioned this book, and I'm delighted that they did. This is a very, very long and rambling answer to introduce myself and my role in this project, and also some of the genesis of how this project came about. But I'm happy to let Mahmoud step in as well and give his perspective. So,
as you were asking the question, Roberto, I remembered Edward Said saying back in 1984, that I was 2 years back then, when he said the Palestinians always need a permission, almost a permission to narrate, as if our right to tell our stories has been always taken away from us. And I think part of coming out with this book is, in one way, contributing to the traditions of the last 10, 15 years, when we Palestinians collectively, writers and editors and creators everywhere, are trying to reclaim that right. And to some extent, we are succeeding. Yet there is the limitation. Not everyone can claim that right. People who are experiencing genocide, people who are under bombardment every day, have very little internet and have very little mind space to actually sit down and write. They need our help. They need our assistance. And I hope we're only giving them our assistance, and we just taking their voices and their stories and their input, and we are amplifying it into the word. That's kind of the premise of the book. For me, there is something even deeper that talks to my own upbringing, growing up in a bookstore, to a dad who worked as a teacher for all his life, and he was trying to, contribute positively to the well-being and to the educational life of the Palestinians. Whenever I was searching, and I'm sure you can attest to that, Roberto, yourself, whenever you search about life before 48, before the Nakba, there's very little you could find. And when you do, you find little pieces here and there, but when you find something, you get really astonished, and it's like, wow, there was a music school, there was a football team, there was the teachers club, there was the music festivals, there was, all this fabric of society, all this life that existed before 48. It was shattered in the Nakba, alongside, of course, destruction of property and displacement of people and killing of individual human beings. But the focus have shifted to speak about people and destruction of places, and we kind of lost, intentionally or not, the ability to document the social, cultural, political, economical life of the Palestinians before 48. And growing up to a time after that, you feel like there is a vacuum almost in our national conscious, in our national, the depth of our society, or the depth of our existence is kind of blurry before 1948. And as I was watching the news unfolding in Gaza, I felt like we are guilty of similar pattern here. And therefore, I was also interested to document the Gazan life as it happens, a bit before, a bit after. But also we should as if taking a still image, if you like, of Gaza as it was. So when we rebuild it, and I am under no delusion that we will rebuild Gaza in the collective sense, then we don't start from zero, and we don't start from nowhere. We pick up from where someone else has left. And I hope that the book does kind of, in a way, contribute a blueprint of how the Palestinian society was, despite all the difficulties of life before October 2023.
Well, before I asked the next questions, I was thinking about Matthew's words about doing something. And I was reminded by the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran pastor killed by the Nazi. And he said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. And God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And so I think each and one of us is doing something in different form and shapes, but the most important thing is to do something about it. And so I want to ask about now people, as Mahmoud just mentioned. There are 61 contributions to this work. And if you were to point out some general points, what would you say these people are trying to tell the readers? And also, among these people, there are mothers, sisters, fathers, brothers, youth and elderly, intellectual and regular workers, all of them in this book. What do you think the public does not understand or does not know about Gaza and Gazans?
It's another great question. There are several things I think that all of our contributors are saying. I'm going to distill it down to just one. And some of our contributors said this explicitly, and some are saying it implicitly, but all of them are saying we're human too. All of them are asserting their humanity in the face of genocide, in the face of a concerted global attempt to erase their humanity. And if there is one message I think that the book carries, it is that all of the people that we spoke to, I'm surprised it was actually only 61. I have a feeling that it was sort of over 100. Maybe we talked a little more, and there were. I'm glad you counted anyway. That's good. And there may have been plenty of others behind the scenes who also maybe didn't make it into print, but who were facilitating contacts and generating meetings that otherwise would never have happened as well. 61 feels quite conservative to me. 161, I would have believed you, but anyway, that's okay. But all of them are asserting the reality of their humanity and their culture and their lives as they were lived before October the 7th, 2023, and afterwards. Some of them, tragically, are no longer with us. I'm glad to say that many are. Some, most we are in contact with, some we're not. So some people, the location of where they are at the moment, are they still inside Gaza? Did they manage to get out? If they got out, where are they at? And so on. Some of that is clear and some of it is not. But they're saying we are people. And they're saying this place was a place that existed, and it was a place for us. It was our place, and it will be again.
I mean, I second what Matthew said. I think also another theme that's unexpected that came through all the interviews is the immense amount of hope that people still subscribe to, and they still wanted to almost project and almost wanted to reflect it back to us, which hope in humanity when humanity is failing them. Hope in the word when the word is still deaf and intentionally or not doesn't want to hear. Hope in international legal framework that doesn't accept wrongdoing, yet it seems that the international community is accepting the continuation of this genocide. Hope that there will be a better future in the most of bleak of times. And it's a very difficult thing to deal with, because when you are, I don't know if it is Gramsci probably who spoke about the optimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect. You know, if you really look at it intellectually, there's nothing to be hopeful about. Yet their heart, their will is driving them for hope. And they wanted us to transfer and transmit this message of hope. And yet we sitting in our privileged houses, editing and receiving these pieces and seeing these messages of hope was very inspiring, and hugely responsible that we have to feed it back into the book. That also when people read the book, they don't just cry, but they also laugh. They don't just feel the pain, but they also feel the beauty and the hope. I guess we are infected, as Mahmoud Darwish once said. We are infected by incurable disease, and that disease is called hope. I guess also without hope, there's very much less left for them. So it's also kind of in a way catching to what is only possible left, which is hope. So yeah, I mean, it's almost, this book is almost a cultivation of hope. We're not just picking up hope, we are planting the hope in the pages of the book, in the words of our contributors, and we wanted to cultivate that hope back. And that's a nice image I want to leave the users with, or the listeners with.
Yeah, I think to reinforce that as well, there are multiple levels of hope in this book. I just want to read at this point 6 lines from a very good friend of mine, Nabil Tarazi, who lives in Amman. And he talked to us from his relative's house, his uncle's house, Hani Tarazi, in Dubai. And it was a very beautiful conversation. Hani has lots of stories about Gaza, Nabil as well from his childhood. And Nabil ended the conversation with these few lines. He said, quote, "For us, Gaza is a symbol, a place that has stood for so many years against aggression, occupation, and genocide. Today, at last, the world is seeing who the Palestinians are. We are human, ordinary human beings, symbolized in what is going on in Gaza every day. Gaza matters because it is the place where the rebirth of the Palestinian nation will probably begin." Unquote. For a statement of hope and forward-thinking inspiration in the midst of genocide, it's hard to come across something more powerful, I think.
I want to pressure on something shortly, because I think this is very important looking at the broader audience. Again, what do you think the public does not really understand beyond the fact that obviously Gazans are human beings, but also what do you think the public does not know about Gaza and Gazans?
Thanks for pushing back on this, Roberto. I think it's inconvenient answer. I'm probably what I'm gonna say. I think Gaza suffer first and foremost of a package of Orientalism, because the Gazans are Arabs, Eastern, Middle Eastern. So there is at the base there is a very skewed image of what the Gazans are, based on years and years of Orientalist subjugations. On top of that, there is a political skewed image, which is that basically they all just want to die. They love dying, and they all teach their kids that death is more valued than life, and they all Hamas, and they all Islamist, and that package. And on top of that, there is also the kind of a new phase of Orientalism that's a product of postmodernity, if you like. They just unlucky people, and they just ended up being in a geopolitics that's unlucky, and there's nothing really we can do, because it's like, ancient hatred between two people, and they just paying the price for it, which basically drives people to feel sorry about it, but really nothing they can do about it, because it is complicated, and it's bigger than they roll. And it's unfortunate that the Gazans and we and Palestinians in general have to fight these 3 levels, if you like. That's is like a mountain to climb on top, really, to untackle political complexities and explain that this is not really a complicated political conflict. This is actually a simple political conflict, and to explain that people there are not, subhumans. They are equal human beings who wanted exactly what the guy down the streets want. They want to eat the same food, and they want to watch the same Netflix movies that we watch, and they want to eat the same food that we are eating. And the political nuances as well, to explain the political nuances about occupation and genocide and apartheid and siege and the pretext of Gaza and so on. That's why That's why, in one way, it's a very, very difficult to fight that stereotype, because it's multi-layered. But that's why it is almost a duty to also do it, because it's the best is either the Gazans seen as victims of their own wrongdoings at best, or the worst is that they're responsible for their own victimhood. And I think in one way, I hope we all committed to correct that image. But I must say, if the West, and I mean it here, if the West want to continue to be racist and Orientalist and superior, then we have a long way to fight. We have a long way to fight for correcting the stereotype. And I'm sorry that on a day like today, I don't think the West have decided to stop its racism and its white supremacy and its Orientalism, which make the whole struggle harder and seemingly more impossible. But the alternative is not good. We're not gonna give up on people, the best of us, who are besieged and served death from the skies by European and American Western weapons on daily basis.
Let me move forward and let's start talking about some of the contributors, so the people of Gaza. I want to start with Mohammed Agha-Kurdi, mostly because he's a doctor and we keep seeing the relentless bombardment by Israeli strikes of hospitals, not just in Gaza, but also now in Lebanon. So Mohammed is a doctor. He works in Gaza for medical aid for Palestinians. And in the book, you publish excerpts of his diary from October 2023 to April 2024. His words, like of all contributors, are painful, as he talks about the difficulties to move around or leave Gaza. And so I was wondering if you can speak about his entries, and particularly about the question of mobility, as mentioned by others in the book, within Gaza, and also the attempts to leave through the border with Egypt.
I'll do my best. I'm not a specialist on exactly what the restrictions have been within Gaza over the last 12 months and how they shifted and changed. But I will certainly address your question to the best of my ability. It was an honor. It was a pleasure and an honor to be put in touch with Mohammed. He calls himself Mo, and all his colleagues also called him Mo as well. So I'm going to call him Mo on the principle that that's his choice. He's a soft-spoken, very calm and considered speaker. He has been in touch by text, but also by voice message as well with us. We were doing an event. We were lucky to do an event the other day, 2 days ago, I think, in Oxford, in England. And one of his colleagues from MAP, from Medical Aid for Palestinians, was able to be present. And she has worked with Mo for a long time, and they know each other very well. And she spoke very movingly and very evocatively and emotionally about Mo himself, about the person and his professionality and professionalism at work as well. Just to chip in as well, I have a small audio clip of Mo in a small audio message which he recorded for Nakba Day in May of this year, when he speaks about the conditions that are around him in Gaza, and the way he speaks is very atmospheric and very evocative of the surroundings that he's in.
I was driving from Khan Yunis to Deir al-Balah, taking the coastal road, from where one is able to catch sight of Gaza, my home. Smoke was coming from the western part of it, and that's where I lived. Literally, my neighborhood was burning. Or in other words, my home was burning. What killed me most was when I turned on the radio, Fairuz was streaming and singing, "Take me home, ردني إلى بلادي." When it first started, they said only 3 days and you'll get back home. And now we're counting more than 7 months, living the worst conditions a human being can endure. Displaced. The majority of us thirsty with no access to drinking clean water. Sometimes hungry, surrounded by death and destruction.
His writing, I wanted to include it because it cuts through to a degree of humanity and a degree of underlying emotion that few of the writers in this book and few other writers are able to achieve. He writes very powerfully about his own individual circumstances, but also the wider universal circumstances of people in Gaza. I think it's important to have his words represented here. So if with your permission, I'm going to read a section from the diaries so that listeners can know what we're talking about and the kind of person that we're talking about as well. I'm going to read a piece of his diary from the beginning, from early in the genocide in October of 2023. And I'll read his last section from April 2024. So the first one, quote, this is October the 9th, 2023. Quote, it's daytime, but I haven't seen any sunlight since early morning. I can't tell whether it's because of clouds or dust from the heavy bombardment. Now, through my window, I see dark smoke rising from northern Gaza. Unbelievably, my building was one of the only ones to survive the deadly attack on my neighborhood last night. The bombardment was the heaviest, and we couldn't reassure our nephews and nieces. Helpless hugs and fake grins didn't work this time. We were so scared and tired. Smoke filled our lungs while debris was falling. But I remember a moment when we all smiled, when we heard it raining. A hand descending from the skies. We do not sleep much. Food and other essentials have started to run out. We lack phone signal and electricity most of the day and barely speak and interact with each other. We grieve the loss of so many silently. Many of my friends have shared a last word on their pages as something to be remembered by in case they die next. I don't think I am ready to read or write any last words. I refuse to imagine death. Unquote. That's an entry from October, very early. This is an entry from the 8th of April, 2024. Quote, I consider myself someone who can sustain a level of well-being during hardship, but this current escalation has undermined my ability to maintain my inner peace and mindfulness. I feel so anxious and irritated. I did not sleep well last night. Tank shellings and air raids continued without pause over the neighborhood near my shelter. The noise of armored vehicles and the intensity of firing from the quadcopters upset me, and I was gripped by the fear of waking up to find myself besieged. My 5-year-old nephew, darling Omar, made us laugh today. He regards this as a war against children. We overheard him telling his mother, at least grown-ups can find coffee in the market. Children like me can't find any snacks or lollipops. Now do you understand why this is a war against us, not you? And that's how Mo writes in his diary and how he finished that section of his diary. he's an extraordinary individual, and Mahmoud talked previously about the responsibility of carrying these stories in this book. We've been talking a lot at the moment. Mahmoud and myself are in the middle of a speaking tour around the UK. So we're spending a lot of time together, and we're spending a lot of time in discussion together as well. And we've talked recently about this, the sort of the weight of responsibility of carrying these stories, and how important it is to platform the voices of the Gazan people who have been suffering, and the necessities imposed on us as editors by the publishing industry, by the media, to be the carriers of the stories, and to how difficult it is sometimes for me as an individual to hold the weight of that on my shoulders, and to be able to present the stories of others and not my own, and how difficult that is sometimes for publishing and media to be able to comprehend. I feel it very strongly that this is not about me, it's not about us, it's about them. And how best to present that is an ongoing discussion, and I can only hope that I get it right most of the time. I haven't really answered your question at all about the restrictions on movement, particularly for doctors in and around Gaza. I don't know. Do you want to add a few words about that?
I mean, only few organizations left operating in Gaza. We know that. Of course, UNRWA, and some of the UN, WHO, UNICEF, MSF, MAP, and maybe that's it.
And maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. So it's and by now the border is closed except from Karam Abu Salem from the Israeli side, and everything is of course being checked and has to be pre-applied, and there's a very small amount of doctors that are allowed in and out, and it's I mean, at this point, I have met some doctors who left. The other day we met one here as well, who left Gaza, and it's, you don't know what is worse, actually, staying there for doctors and working in such a horrible situation almost endlessly, seeing their colleagues overworked with very little rest, and seeing the types of injuries and the amount of injuries you're receiving every day, or between having the privilege to leave as a doctor and then have to deal with the consequences of your own privilege that you could have, you decided to leave or escape. That's again part of the extended trauma that's multi-layered itself.
Do you remember that there was that piece? We had more than one person said this, but there was that piece from Mahmoud Judeh when he talked about the guilt and the regret that he felt having got out, because having got out of Gaza and sitting in Cairo in relative safety and trying to process the experience, he feels like I think he said he feels like he's dying every day. He's died 1,000 times since he left Gaza, and how he often thinks that it would be preferable not to have left and to have died once, but inside Gaza, which is a shocking and a tragic and very moving thing to say.
We left home with nothing but my daughter's Baghdad school's bag. Everything else gone in an instant. I often think, what if we had stayed in the house? We would have died once. Instead, we left, and now we die 1,000 times a day from alienation, poverty, and the loss of ambition and hope.
Well, I want to talk about children because I think these are an important aspects of what's going on in Gaza. And though, the stories that you present in the book, they may not be written by children, but they are a central component. As you just mentioned, the daughter of this man leaving with just a school bag. And so that brings me to ask about education. And I know, Mahmoud, you care much about education as you come from a family of educators and yourself are one, given your job and the fact that you're a someone who's basically spreading culture and knowledge through selling books. Israeli forces have destroyed almost every school in Gaza. And Amani Shaltut, who managed the photo and film archives of UNRWA in Gaza, claims that the education is the only way forward. And so I was wondering if you can speak of what is left of the educational system in Gaza, and how do you think the words of Amani may turn into reality? Is there a way of reestablishing an educational system, educations for children?
Yeah, I mean, as we coming into this interview, I was in touch with another Asma, with another person who now volunteers in tents for education. She's also one of the contributors for our book. And every day now there's already schooling of some sort of education happening in tents. I don't want to romanticize about it too much, but basically the kids are being gathered in allocated tent in those don't know what to call them, refugee concentration camps that have been established around the so-called safe areas. And the children are gathered, and teachers are volunteering to teach them, or at least to engage with them, keep their sanity and their well-being. Look, I mean, you said it, Roberto. Palestinians have a long history and long tradition of valuing education. In Amani's word, which we probably also send you to play in this podcast, she said this is the passport for a better world that we are hoping. I think education has been one of the only tools that Palestinians had in their last 77 years to continue to find space for their foot on this earth and to fight from that spot for their rights. So immediately as the war was progressing, Israel continued a systematic attack on schools, universities, of course, complete destruction of all the universities and cultural institutions and libraries and archives institutions. But immediately the Palestinians also tried to find mechanism in which they can continue the educational system as well, particularly, in a communal way in tents. We also know from the Palestinians who left to Egypt that they're also starting now finding ways in which they can incorporate the Palestinian children in the Egyptian school system. It's not ideal because also the Egyptian system is also as corrupt as could be, and it's also conspiring against the Palestinians as well. And the Palestinians find it very hard for their kids to be put in place or be part of the Egyptian system. Yet the Palestinians are finding ways as well. It's literally is the number one priority for any family after food and water is education for their kids. We know also that Gaza is a very, very young society. I forgot the numbers from now, but it could easily be found on UNICEF website, the amount of students that are now without schools. They already lost a year and a half, but hopefully they are not far away from returning to some normality of schooling. I'm saying this, I don't know how, but I'm saying it in the name of hope.
And I'm going to platform a writer. She's not a writer, but she should be. Well, she is a writer because she wrote something, but she's not a recognized writer. Who contributed a piece for us on exactly this. Her name is Saba Timraz. She is 20 years old. She was born in 2004 in Deir al-Balah, and she graduated from high school, and her degree course was interrupted by the genocide beginning in October 2023. And she wrote a piece for us. I'm just going to quote the last little section because Saba is somebody whose voice demands to be heard. And I hope that this book and the work that we've done on this book and her inclusion in this book is able to bring her some worldwide profile, because she deserves it. She and her sister were stuck inside Gaza when the genocide began. Her parents were outside, and she was there surviving, managing for 184 days before her father was able to arrange for her sister and her to cross the border at Rafah and travel to Egypt. And she says, quote, "Thank God I left Gaza after 184 days of this brutal war. I left Gaza, but it did not leave me. Rather, my attachment to it and my love for it grew. And still, we wait for the unknown, while Gaza continues counting the days. We now live in Egypt without residency, with no idea what the future holds. There are countless hurdles. I need to enroll at a university here to complete my studies. My sister, who is in the 11th grade in Gaza, needs to restart school. It's not easy to lose everything and start your life again in another country. I am a displaced refugee. My heart is broken. I am dead, but trapped in life. Has our life just become a game controlled by America and the occupier? They kill, destroy, and do whatever they can to harm us, and then tell the world that they are the victims and we are the monsters. We are an occupied people and have been since 1917. Our lands were stolen, our honor was violated, and the building blocks of our lives were destroyed. We want to be liberated and to live in freedom and dignity. We will not surrender our rights, no matter how long it takes." Unquote. Saba is amazing. And Mahmoud also mentioned Asma, who is a teacher who is part of that cohort of teachers who are trying to restart the process of education in the tents and in the camps in the so-called safe areas. And we were able to include 2 or 3 pieces that she wrote for an online education journal. And this is a very, very beautiful piece which she wrote on December the 27th of 2023. Quote, "I've loved reading since I was a child, especially novels and detective fiction. In year 9, I remember buying 25 books and standing them up nicely on a shelf in my small bedroom. I would save my pocket money to buy the books I loved. The following year, my tastes developed and I bought twice as many books, sometimes reading the same one twice over. My collection grew and the number of bookshelves increased. By the time I completed my university studies, I owned a small library. Eventually, I could call it a proper library. It held many types of books, from short stories, poetry collections, and literary novels in Arabic and English to books given to me by dear writer friends, scholarly works of learning, and religious, scientific, and historical volumes that I loved and that loved me back. Then I was forced to leave them behind and move to the south of Gaza. For the people in the north, where I lived with my family, the suffering grew intense. Eventually, they had no choice but to use the pages of books to light fires in order to cook whatever scraps of food they could gather for their children. I didn't feel sorry for the books. Books are cheap when set against the resilience of our people in the north, who are patient and grateful to God amid great suffering. We wish we could offer them help, but we are powerless in the face of their sacrifices and tortured by the impossibility of reaching them with medicine, food, or water to sustain life. Books used to ignite our thoughts. Now books feed our children."
It's hard now for me to move forward, given the heavy quotes, but I think it's important to think about also other mechanisms to keep sane. And I think also for the reader of the book, it will be surprising that at some point in 2 parts of the book, you have 2 stories that are going to make you laugh. In the end is a bitter laugh, but I think very important. So I just want to mention here Izzeldin Bukhari, who's actually a good friend of all of us, I guess, who is a quite famous food tour operator in Jerusalem. But in the book, he's actually talking about something different. And he's talking about his personal story of trying to go to her sister's wedding in Gaza before, obviously, October 7. And he brought with him a cat that would have been a wedding gift. There is a surreal dialogue about the cats, one that I think people would think that it only happens in movies, but actually it's the normal life for Palestinians, as well as there is this surreal chapter by writer and actor Naim Al-Khatib, who talks about hygiene and health, but essentially talks about war and shit.
Go on. I mean, I'll do a little bit on the cat, and then I'll leave the shit to Mahmoud. The cat is just a great story. Izzadeen was put my way for this, actually, by also another mutual friend, Christel, who does the Stories from Palestine podcast. Not that I want to tout the opposition here, Roberto, but anyway. And Christel said that she was talking to Izzadeen at one point, and Izzadeen has this fantastic story about this cat and Gaza and the whole process, and really you should listen to it and he should tell you. So I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm in the middle of gathering stories, and this is a valid story as any. He told it so well. I mean, I was, as you say, there weren't many periods of light relief in these weeks and months of putting this book together, but this was one. I'm not going to reveal the story. We've got the basics, that it's like it's his sister's wedding, and there's this cat, and like it's surreal, and something happens. And I'll let the reader read the story, because the way that I put it down, the way that Izzadeen told it, and it's marvelous. It's a marvelous piece of writing. It wasn't even writing, it was speaking. It was a marvelous piece of storytelling is what it was. But anyway, yes, that is one. And the other is Naim's, as you said. Go ahead.
It's one of those moments when tragedy and comedy meet somewhere, and just a journey to the bathroom becomes a life or death journey, and using the basic need to go to the bathroom and investigate our psychology of needing the bathroom, and of course how kids relate to that, to adults, was astonishing. And it was really, it's one of those stories that whenever you go to the toilet, you remember that story.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually also remember the story.
Going to the toilet safely without the prospect of being sniped while you're
without being the snipe, because where you are hiding, and whereas the bathroom is overlooking the balcony, and the balcony is overlooking an area where the shooting is coming from. And I actually have used that story the other day because I was invited to speak about the concept of having an overview, or having a view on something. And it's really haunted me, this story, because this is someone who lives in a beautiful house with the plus, if you like, with the advantage of having in the middle of a house a big room with a big windows that are overlooking something beautiful, something open. But in that situation, it became a curse, because that overlooking is also turned around. It's also crossfire, or it's also a place where you can be shot at. And you crossing from your bedroom to the bathroom becomes a risky bio journey that you have to do a few times a day. It's astonishing how people were able to share these stories and share the laugh and the human aspect of it, and the fun part of it as well. And that doesn't take anything from the dramatic or the tragic situation that they're in. On the contrary, it actually is a testimony to their humanity and to their light-spirited nature.
Let me move to talk about journalists. Yesterday, Hassan Hamad was the last Palestinian journalist killed in an attack on his home in Jabalia camp. So far, 175 Palestinian journalists have been killed. And I must say that today, I was surprised to hear that a Fox News correspondent actually said that Palestinian journalists are being deliberately assassinated by Israeli and army. This is coming from Fox News, of all networks and of all journalists. So I think there is a realization that this is not crossfire casualties, but there is obviously a deliberate plan to kill journalists. Now, in the book, there are several journalists that are contributing with their stories, and I'm thinking about Humanises, Ibrahim Yagi, and others. And so I was wondering if you can tell us something about their writings, the work of journalists in Gaza throughout this past year and today.
I actually wanted just to add before maybe Matthew chip in here. I want to also remind listeners that the Israeli army have closed Al Jazeera offices both in Jerusalem, but also in the West Bank on the back of a military order by an occupied forces in a occupied territory in Area A, and it's really sometimes you question if we live almost on a different planet. Not a single Israeli media or mainstream media have actually highlighted the, I don't know what to call it, but the tragedy, the madness of such an action. And not a single journalist have acted with what you would imagine from the mainstream media anyway, acted with what you think of the colleagueship that you would expect from a fellow journalist. Fellow TV channels are operating in an occupied territory in such an important time is actually closed by military order by the army in a territory that they do not have jurisdiction in. It's astonishing how the media is. I don't know. I don't want to go as far as saying being part of almost a genocide, but they are definitely creating a moral and ethical ground, if there is, or they're attempting to create ethical and moral ground for the execution of this genocide by being silent and by creating a justification often for the Israeli actions, as far as closing even TV channels and killing fellow journalists.
I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I think there have been, from what I understand, many concerted efforts by several of the global media networks to try and get into Gaza and also to this is the international network and to challenge Israeli restrictions on sourcing of news, but the lack of, for want of a better word, solidarity with a media organization like Al Jazeera is I would say it's shocking and shameful, but it's not surprising. Journalism, international news gathering, is an extraordinarily cutthroat business, and I imagine that the editors and the managing editors and the directors of news in offices in wherever, London and Washington and Paris, are trying to take advantage of Al Jazeera's absence rather than doing the better thing, which would be sharing resources and pooling efforts and subverting Israeli military orders rather than conceding to them. The role of journalists in Gaza has been absolutely fundamentally key and important throughout this genocide and before the genocide as well. The work that they have done in simply documenting what has been happening, often, for not just for days and weeks, but for months at a time without a break, under the most taxing possible conditions of work, They're heroes. I mean, I understand that people don't want to be labeled as superheroes, but if anyone can accept the tag of heroes in Gaza, it seems to me that the Gazan journalists, as a body, if they're not obviously all one organization, but Gazan journalists in general have allowed us, being the rest of the world, to at least have knowledge to some degree of the horror that has erupted in and around their communities. Without them, we would have no eyes or ears. And Israel would be even freer than it is, should that be possible, to commit more atrocities than they already have done. Some of the journalists in the book, just going back to the contributors in the book, have just done extraordinary work. I'm thinking particularly, I just want to pick out one. There are several. As you said, Ibrahim Yahi writes very evocatively of this journey that he took on displacement from the north to the south, along a road of corpses. Muhammad Omar as well, who Mahmoud knows. We included reports that he was delivering 20 years ago from the bombardment of Rafah in 2003, and seeing those juxtaposed with reports of today is also very striking and very moving. There's one person, you mentioned her, Yumna El Sayed, who is an Al Jazeera correspondent, Al Jazeera English, I believe, correspondent. She's now outside, but for many months she was reporting from inside Gaza. And the story that she told, which we've included in this book, it's very short. I'm not going to read it, partly because it's horrible and it requires a degree of a sort of mental preparation. It's not something that you would just want popping out of your computer when you're listening to a podcast. But she has also told the story. She's won, as far as I'm aware, multiple journalism awards, international journalism awards, since last October, for her work and her reporting. And she tells this story also when she receives an award live on stage as well. She's extraordinary, and as much a hero as anyone in the book. Without them, we'd be lost.
Now, as we reach the end of our conversation, I have a couple of more questions, and one obviously is connected to my own choice to focus on certain contributors more than others. You brought your own. The book is very much about empathy, understanding, talking about reality. And as you said, some of the chapters can be also brutal, and you have to face the reality of what Gazan experience on daily life. I was wondering if there's any other story that you think it's worth to bring out and to tell the listeners so that they may feel even more connected to the book and the stories coming out of Gaza.
I'm going to talk a little bit about, a couple of stories from the book that I feel particularly privileged to have been able to write. There's not much sort of original writing in the book from me and from Mahmoud. There are a few sections that we included as context, as contextual sort of support for the accounts of Gazan culture and Gazan history that we were receiving from Gazans themselves. One story I was particularly proud to be able to unearth is one which I don't think has been told before. Certainly not, I don't think it's been told in English before. And it's about the pioneers of photography in Gaza. There are three pioneer families that through a series of sort of almost chance connections, the threads of a story began to emerge, and I kind of followed a thread here and I followed a thread there, and I started to realize that in fact this is a quite a large and all-encompassing story about one particular aspect of Gazan culture and Gazan economy before the Nakba and immediately after the Nakba as well. There were three pioneer families who were involved in developing photography in Gaza in the 1930s and the 1940s. The first, exactly who did what exactly when is somewhat disputed as well. A first was a man called Levon Yotnachparian, and he is a hero of the Armenian genocide. His life story is utterly extraordinary and very poorly documented and poorly researched. I was able to include bits and pieces in the book as well. He, after the Armenian genocide and after some time in Damascus and other places, he moved to Gaza in 1927, and shortly thereafter began photographing, appears to be British soldiers, to provide them with mementos to send home to their families. So this wasn't exactly a professional studio, it wasn't exactly a business, but it was a sort of a sideline, it appears to be, for him, and then also for his one of his sons. I was able, amazingly, to track down two of his grandsons who now live in California, quite close to each other, actually, in suburbs of Los Angeles, not Glendale, but either side of Glendale. And they were both very forthcoming with stories and images from the family archive. And there's a whole story as well about how the business developed through the 1930s and 40s. Another pioneer was a man named Hrant Nakashian, who was a photographer for UNRWA, for the United Nations, in Gaza in 1948 and 1949, before UNRWA, and then when UNRWA was created in 1950, thereafter through the 50s and the 60s. And he was making images in the refugee camps in particular in the beach camp, just beside Gaza City. Extraordinarily powerful individual portraits of children in school, there's an image of a man behind a fence of barbed wire. There's an image of an old woman sort of cradling her head, uplifting and also very emotional and moving portraits. Through another series of chances with a mutual friend in Jerusalem, I was put in touch with his son, Saro Nakashian, who lives today inside the Armenian compound in the old city of Jerusalem. Saro was wonderful. He talked at length about his father. He shared stories and pictures from his father's archive. A third family was, a third pioneer was Kerem Jegalian, who began the first, what might be called the first professional photography business, studio business in Gaza in 1944. And I was able, he was extraordinary particularly for street photography. He has images of the main street, Omar al-Mukhtar Street, in 1950.51, 52, something, with street life, with a sense of movement, but a sense of commerce and an image of how the place was. He was able to take almost sort of candid portraits of people enjoying picnics in the citrus groves around Gaza in the 1950s and 1960s, in sharp contrast with the images of Gaza that we see today. But even looking back at archive images of Gaza in many of the main photography archives, they tend to be by Israeli photographers, and they tend to be either in the period of taken either in the period of Israeli occupation end of 1956 and early 57, or post 1967. And the level of sympathy and empathy and the objectification of subjects, or lack of it, juxtaposing Israeli photographers with photographers such as Kehram Jeusalem was very enlightening for me. I'm not a visual analyst. I'm not a student of photography, but that was absolutely fascinating to see. And I was very lucky to be able to speak to Kehram's daughter Anahid, who now lives in France. And she did a Zoom interview with me, and she was very generous in sharing stories of. She remembers growing up in Gaza very clearly, in her when she was a child and in her teenage years as well. And Kehram's grandson, who is also called Kehram Jeusalem, he teaches fashion and design at a university in Cairo, and is also spends part of the time in Paris as well. And he has saved what there is, apparently all there is left of his father's archive is now in 3 red boxes in the possession of his grandfather's archive, in the possession of Kehram. And he has constructed a very beautiful exhibition which has toured and other things around those images of Gaza. This story sort of encompassing Yotnakpanian, Nakashian and Jeusalem, you can hear from the voice, from the surnames that all 3 are Armenian. This story encompassing the Armenian presence in Gaza and the Armenian influence on photography, which is very familiar from Jerusalem and from Jaffa and from other places, Beirut and Aleppo and other places around the region as well. But to be able to relate that now to Gaza, hopefully that's what I've done, is a sort of a little opening of the beginning of a story, which historians and scholars better placed to research than me will be able to take forward and to add to the image of Gaza. I was very, very proud to be able to include that chapter in this book.
I mean, I will just add very briefly on the amount of artists, theater people, musicians, singers that we were able to find. That part of interest me, of course, the cultural element of Gaza, but also the centrality of Gaza to the cultural scene in Palestine, that we, even guilty being Palestinians ourselves, we being often guilty of neglecting or forgetting the contribution that Gazans artists, including poets, as far as Moin Pseso and so on, that has contributed to the Palestinian collective cultural identity. It was assuring and surprising in some ways also to see the richness and the diversity and the rebellious nature of the artists in Gaza. And it's also scary to saw that those also being targeted, whether as poets or whether as doctors or whether as a theater persons or whether because they will be, they were, and they hopefully will be part of creating a vibrant, recreating a vibrant Palestinian society in Gaza. And it was a pleasure to talk to them, because I think they also have a pulse of a society, or a shade of color of a society that this book would have not been complete without that color. And some of them are still in Gaza, some have left. In fact, this is one of the most painful stage now post the book is coming out, is to trying to stay in touch with those people, trying to feed back what we are doing, what we are telling, trying to take the response we're getting from people back to them, trying to keep them being part of our journey now with the book. It's not easy, and it's also a reminder of the privilege that we have, being able to travel and meet people and talk and share these beautiful stories without them most of the time. So, yeah.
I want to end our conversation with the closing words of Hussam El-Nunu. Hussam is a father of 3, and he has worked at the Gaza Community Mental Health Program for more than 20 years. And I also want to highlight that these words were written in 2014. Son, it's good to die for your home, but it's much better to live for it. Some of the contributors seem to believe there is no peace ahead. Others, their broken hearts will never recover. What do you hear from the voices of Gaza?
In very general terms, I hear hope, and I hear resilience, and I hear resistance. I hear the voices of people who have been trying to attract our, meaning the West's, attention for many years, for generations. And perhaps now, perhaps at last, there is some traction being gained among audiences in the West as to the degree of injustice that the Palestinians have suffered and the degree of violence to which they're subject on a daily and hourly basis. What to say, Roberto? It's very hard to know what to say. What do we hear in the voices of Gaza? I hear our voices. They are us. Whoever we are defined as, they are us and we are them.
There's a lot of disappointment. There is a lot of anger. There's need to be a time after this war where we and the people of Gaza need to sit down, and we need to be listening to how we misunderstood many of their things that they've been shouting out for years. We need to try to explain how our inhumanity has failed them, how we, in many cases, have left them alone, have chosen not to listen to them, have not came to their assistance. I'm looking for a quote from the book where someone is asking, "How are you?" And he said, or she said,
"Yeah." This is a quote. I'll give you the quote, and you can carry on. This was a quote which was picked up by one of our contributors, Khaldun Bashara from Riyadh in Ramallah, and he was watching TV in the first week of the genocide. And he saw a resident of Deir el-Balah, whose name was Reem Abu Jabr, and she was being interviewed by a journalist from France 24 TV. And the journalist said, "How are you?" or something, as journalists say. And she replied, "We in Gaza, we're fine. But how are you? What about your conscience? What about your values? What about all of that? Frankly, we are concerned."
This voice of disappointment and being let down is a strong one, and it's our responsibility now to act, to at least stop this genocide from happening. But there's going to be a time for check and balances between us and the friends of Gaza, and between the criminals who have perpetrated this crime against the people of Gaza.
These were Mahmoud Mouna and Matthew Teller, editors of Daybreak in Gaza, Stories of Palestinian Lives and Culture, published by Saki Books in 2024. Mahmoud, Matthew, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thanks so much, Roberto.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jeusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.